Good morning. Welcome to our Weber County Commission meeting. Today is Tuesday, the 18th of September, 2018. Seated to my immediate right is Commissioner Scott Jenkins. Seated to my left is Commissioner James Ebert, and I'm Commissioner Harvey. Our invocation this morning will be given by Caleb Rivera. Our Pledge of Allegiance will be given by Mr. Felix Yavarino, and our Thought of the Day will be given by Commissioner Jenkins. Mr. Rivera.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that you've given to us in which to live. Thank you, Lord, for our government that you've given to us to help us with our daily lives. We ask that as the meeting goes on today, that you would bless, that you'd give wisdom and guidance to our commissioners and all those in authority in our government. Father, we ask that you bless our state and our nation as well, that you'd be with those that govern that they would govern in the fear of God and in the fear of those that they are here to serve. I pray, God, that everything that is done here today would be done to your honor and glory and to the betterment of the public. And we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Commissioner.
Thank you. So the other night, we had a chance to go out to Fort Buenaventura for a closing social of an event that we had in town. And when we were sitting out there, Commissioner Harvey and myself, we sat there and you just watch what's happening around you. So Fort Buenaventura is covered with trees, and it's like a little oasis in the middle of a sea of activity. And we're down there watching this, and we've got people doing black powder shooting, and they're shooting with their bow and arrows. And over here, we have Indians dancing, and they're fly fishing, and you just watch that, and watch what's taking place, and how special it is. And it was so special. And I told my wife when I got home that night, I says, you know, we don't realize what a special place we live in here in Weber County, Utah. I'm telling you, we should thank our lucky stars every day that we live here and that we have such a place to raise our families. I am so, I don't know about how you feel, but I feel so blessed to be part of this county. And I just want to pass that along this morning. It's my thought of the day. Because I tell you, sometimes we're so busy that we lose perspective of what's around us. And I just am so grateful to be here. So that's my thought for this day. Thank you.
Thank you. We're now at item number E on our agenda. It's public comment portion. For those of you who would like to address the commission about anything that might be on this agenda or anything else, please limit your comments to 3 minutes and come to the podium if you would, and do that now. You'll state your name and your address.
Good morning. Ron Gleason, unincorporated Weber County and Huntsville area.
Good morning.
Appreciate your time. I just want to take a couple of minutes to make some comments about special events in the Ogden Valley, particularly since we're going to hear about the tax advisory recommendations. But last Saturday, the 15th of September, was the second year in a row in which we had 3 large events occurring in the valley on the same day. The Huntsville Marathon, which is 2,000 plus people, Xterra, which is 1,200 plus people, and the regional high school mountain race at Powder Mountain, which they advertised to be 800 to 1,000 people. We know that each one of these events have some effect on the citizens and potential movement through the valley. You know, Xterra, 8:30 to 11, had the canyon affected and also getting across the dam. Huntsville Marathon up through Monte Cristo and then across 39 by the Chevron. And then Trappist Loop, which is down to 1 lane because of repaving, was affected to the 1,000 some odd people coming in and out of the valley for the high school events. I took the opportunity to see what the effect really was and jumped in my vehicle and went down to Ogden to do some shopping. Waited approximately 25 minutes to get past the dam. While there's a mile backup on the side of 39 and also on 158, there's more than a mile backup. Going down the canyon, the traffic was backed up past the Oaks, almost to the Valhalla neighborhood, and returning around 11 o'clock, the canyon was clear, which was nice, but there's another 25 to 30 minute backup up to Trappers Loop from 500 South to Chevron to the Trappers Loop for the marathon to get through. There were some, because of lack of signage, people didn't know what was going on, and some people were trying to turn around, especially with trailers are made for a tough situation. I know that Scott Mendoza is looking at the ordinance, section 38 of special events, because there is an ordinance which does dictate special events and how they should be applied for and granted. I would hope that this becomes a project and that you folks endorse. And in looking at the process, a couple things that I'd like to point out is, one, I hope you find a better way to publish these special events. People don't know which events are happening when. There's a calendar which is buried on the Weber County website, but I've not spoken to anybody who knows about it. If you want to find out details about the event, you have to understand how to use the Merati system. I think the event organizers need to do a better job with impact articles in paper saying, here's exact time and here are the exact locations. We need much better signage for what's going on, particularly the day of the event. There was nothing about the marathon, how long it would be, and alternative ways of moving around the valley. The whole process for getting the permit needs to be changed. For instance, the permit for the marathon wasn't submitted to the 16th of May of this year. Xterra wasn't submitted till July 30th. So if we're not asking these people to submit applications early, how can we know when there is potential conflict with it? I think we all understand the positive impact these have. Many of us enjoy the events, either helping or participating. But participation in these events are fickle. So I hope that we put quality over quantities with these, and we understand how people are enjoying the event and also what the impact is for the residents of the valley. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to comment to the commission? Nothing being recognized. Commissioners, any comments for Mr. Gleason?
I would like to comment on that. You know, the Upper Valley, we're loving you to death, you're telling us. It's a special place up there, and it's one of the few places around the country that all these events can happen. And so your message is heard here. I do understand that. The other thing, can I ask for personal privilege here?
Personal privilege granted.
You know, there's two ladies sitting right here that I know. And
I deny no personal privilege.
I know
See the looks on her face.
It's all right.
One of them works for me right now, and they're both named Susan Hancock. And I just want you to know, it's really nice to have you two here today. I appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Well, that's so great. Are there any other Susan Hancocks? That's great. Welcome all of you. Terrific. Commissioners, we're going to move on to item number F in our agenda, which is a consent items. Number one is a request for approval of warrants 1540 to 1553 and 431827 to 431992 in the amount of $1,977,107.97. Item two is a request for approval of purchase orders in the amount of $154,056. Item three is a request from the Weber County Clerk Auditor's Election Office for approval of the poll workers for the 2018 general election. And item number four is a request for approval of the new business licenses. Commissioners, any questions regarding any of the consent items?
I would like to divide these items because I want to vote to approve them, but I do not want to vote to approve the one submitted by the sheriff for Midwest Commercial Interiors. So can you break one out so we can vote for all the others?
Yes, you can. According to Mr. Crockett, you can. Go ahead.
If there's a particular item that you want removed from the consent agenda, that would fall down as an action item. The ones that are remaining, you can go ahead and vote as a consent.
If that particular item is then an action item, does it need to be calendared then for next week or another time?
No, if it was properly noticed under the consent agenda, it should be fine. It was noticed under that, and so it can fall to the next one. It just means that there's going to be discussion, more detailed discussion about the item.
Terrific. Understand. Is there any other questions on any of these?
So a question for Mr. Hatch. We're regulated by state law on how we interact with other offices. And an item that comes through the PO list or the warrant list, if properly moved through the purchasing agent, but not approved through the commission, how is that handled? If we don't approve this PO for the purchase of an item in another elected official's budget, what happens to that item?
My understanding, and Mr. Crockett can correct me because it kind of goes into the legal area, is that the commission has the responsibility to approve all purchases made by the county. And I am not sure that a department can move forward with the payment to a vendor without the approval of the commission.
I'm talking not about an office, the department. I'm talking about an office.
Correct. Sorry.
If you purchase something with your equipment budget that's been approved in your budget for $20,000 worth of equipment in your equipment budget, can the commission stop you from purchasing an item in that budget? That's what my question is, because I'm wondering where it goes from here if we don't.
I think the answer, and I would have to take a closer look at this particular item, but I think it would fall down to whether the purchase is related to a statutory function of that elected official, if that's something that can be interfered with or not, or if there's any crossover, but I'd have to take a closer look at that particular item.
For then commissioners, for the record, then we will pull Midwest Commercial Interiors from that from the warrant list and have further debate on that, or we'll get a little more clarification. For right now, I'd like that to be held for a week, and then we can either place it on an action item for future discussion, or we can get more clarification from the attorney's office. Does that work for you, Commissioner?
Well, it does. But we don't have to hold off for another week. You can just take it down to item G and make it A. Under action items, we can deal with it then. He said we could do it. So I'm okay with moving it down to item to G.
The question that would come up is whether if it was denied or not approved, whether that would be allowed under the law, if that would be an interference with another elected official's statutory functions, and I would need time to look at that.
That's my question, and that's why we'll wait. Thank you for that question. We could remove that, but I think we'll wait till next week. And so let's hear after you, considering your time, Chris, we'll do that. Ricky, can you give us a comment on the rest of the consent items, please?
Absolutely. We issued 15 purchase orders this week for $150,000. 40% of that amount, or $60,000, was for the jail, and that includes the chairs that are in question, as well as some fingerprint equipment maintenance. 15%, or $22,000, is for software licensing. 11%, or $17,000, is for operations. That's to purchase an ATV and dump bed for the clearing in parks. 8%, or $13,000, is for roads, and that's for rock chip primarily, as well as some temporary staffing costs. 8%, or $12,000, is for elections, and that's for a few more ballot printers and cases. And $7,000, or 10%, sorry, 7%, or $10,000, is for Golden Spike, and that's to purchase concessions. As far as checks, we wrote 180 checks this week for $2 million. 37% of that amount, or $741,000, was insurance, health and dental insurance for employees. 11%, or $222,000 is for the jail, and that will go primarily towards food, medical supplies, and mental health services. 10% or $190,000 is the monthly contribution to our paramedic fund. 9% or $177,000 is our monthly contribution to the Weber Human Services organization. 6% or $124,000 is road construction on 2550 South. And then 5% or $103,000 is a payment to our public defenders.
Thank you very much. Commissioners, are there any questions for Mr. Hatch? Then I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I would make a motion that we approve these items, except for Midwest Commercial. And I'd like to explain that to you, why I'm objecting to that. You know, I'm amazed that the sheriff could buy 107 chairs for $51,000. That just blows me away. I mean, some of these chairs are $580, and I want to go out and see a $580 office chair. I'm just overwhelmed at that. 107 chairs. That's a lot of chairs, and for them to spend $51,000 and they come into us in the budget hearing and complain about their budget and how bad they're doing, I want to inspect it first. So that's my motion.
Have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second it, if I can make a comment. Ricky, have you had a chance to go over this purchase?
I'm glad you asked. I was going to interrupt, but then I didn't want to. Yes, I talked with Stephanie Ebert out at the jail to ask, or at the sheriff's office to ask about this purchase order, and she sent me an email with photographs of the chairs as well as an explanation. I'm happy to forward that to you, or I could read the explanation as part of this meeting if that would be your desire, whatever you'd like.
Very good. Any other comments? Commissioners, I have a motion and a second to approve all the line items in the consent except for Midwest Commercial and Interiors. Call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll move on to our action items. The first one we have is by our Tourism Tax Advisory Board. We have the chair of that board, Mr. Steve Ballard, and Sarah Tolliver from our Convention Visitors Bureau. We welcome you. Also want to recognize and embarrass as much as we can Ms. Kim Bouchard, who's in the audience. Thank you for being here as well. You guys have done so much for our community and our area, and I point over to you too, Kim. Without getting too much, there are rarely things that I attend that don't have Kim's touch or has had Kim's touch somewhere along the way. When you talk about being very philanthropic with our community, I love, and Steve, you're the same way. You've kind of picked that torch up and running with Kim, and I really appreciate you guys. So you have a presentation for us today.
Yes, so
It says it was 30 minutes long. If you could carve that down to 29.
Far from it. So as was mentioned, I'm the chair of the Tourism Tax Advisory Board. Sarah's the vice chair of that same board. And this is a board that was created a while, many years back to advise on the collection of tourism taxes that are collected. And so that's what we're here to do today, is to advise on tourism taxes. So this is the current board. You can see the first slide is the current board of who that is made up of and who is on there. In addition to many meetings with this group, we also engaged with other interested parties from the hospitality industry and from other places. And we've had a lot of discussion. We've kind of boiled it down into this presentation, and it's gone a lot of different ways. There's been a special task force created to also look at these different issues. The reason that we are here and that we're making this is because we are at a unique time. This is the first time that we have actually TRCC collection is exceeded TRCC expenses. And so now that has happened, now we're advising where to take that extra and what to do with it. And I'll turn the time over to Sarah for the specific recommendation.
So as you are all well aware, I'm going to let me back up for 1 second and go over this. So we currently have 3 taxes that fall into the tourism tax collection pool when Steve's referring to the TRCC. One is transient room tax or the hotel lodging tax, one is restaurant tax, and one is lease vehicle tax. TRCC stands for Tourism, Recreation, Culture, and Conventions Tax, so it's the umbrella for all of those. If you look up here, these are the collections from the actual collections from 2017 in each of those categories. And then you can see where expenditures come in Weber County under each of those categories. The ones that are in the bracket are ones that aren't dedicated sources from there, but have been used to cover, for example, the ski bus in the past, which we no longer fund, operations and various capital projects. So as Steve mentioned, we're in kind of a unique time because in the end of 2019, in December of 2019, the bond payment that we have on our Ogden Nichols Conference Center will be expiring. Currently, that is paid out of these TRCC funds through the restaurant tax allocation and will free up some money. So as we, as a Tourism Tax Advisory Board, which is a legislatively mandated board to provide recommendations to the counties on how these funds are allocated, wanted to make sure that we were planning ahead and making some strategic recommendations to the commission so that once those funds are available, we do have a great, strong strategic plan in place and we're not trying to figure it out as we go. So with the expiration of the bond, we know that a number of our facilities are in need of significant capital improvements. And then we also want to make sure we're being really smart and looking at that long-term infrastructure growth so that we continue to drive those things that in turn put money back into the tourism tax pool. Commissioner Jenkins, you mentioned this morning what a great place it is we live in, and it's an amazing opportunity to be able to promote and sell the place that we live so others can come visit and see what an amazing place this is as well. And we want to make sure that when they come, they're having the experience that we've promised based on the right assets being in place. So if we look at this, this is just a quick overview to highlight to you. We did, the task force that was put into place for this was included part of the Culture Parks and Rec team. And we looked back 10 years over tourism tax collection history to determine what the growth curve should look like if we continue along that same path. So if we look at that, our TRCC has about an annual 6% growth rate and our TRT a 5% growth rate. So you can just see that we'll continue to increase over the next 10 years and where we should wind up in 2027. As part of these recommendations, like I just mentioned, there's a little bit of a tug and pull all the time, obviously, between infrastructure needs and the marketing and promotion needs to let people know about the facilities and the assets that we have. We are all well aware and appreciate the partnership that we have with the Culture Parks and Rec team, that there is a very fine balance that we juggle back and forth between the two needs and that we work to make sure that both needs are being met. So the recommendations that we're going to give to you today are the same ones that we gave last year, since they don't take effect until next year at the end of 2019, but we've made some updates based on your feedback last year, so we'll get into that. But the first one is that on the marketing and promotion side of things, it's pretty standard in the industry for a Convention and Visitors Bureau to be, for their budget to be based off a percentage of transient room tax collections. So the suggestion or recommendation from the Tourism Tax Advisory Board is that the CVB be funded at 70% of the transient room tax collection. You can see from the graph here that will start in 2020 once that bond payment is expired and other needs are being able to be met. And you can see the growth there and just how the lines mirror each other. If you look at TRCC overall, that big jump there in 2020 is when those funds that are currently going towards the bond payment become available to us. So you can just see what becomes available as we reach the beginning of 2020. So in summary, if you're looking at those two pools, the recommendation from the Tourism Tax Advisory Board is that our transient room tax allocations continue to fund the Convention and Visitors Bureau, that we have a legacy fund that's available for local organizations and their special events that will bring in visitors to our community, that we grow that by 10% each year, that we continue funding Goal for the role that they play in supporting all of the events that come into our community and the volunteer spirit that we're keeping alive from the Olympics, and that if there's anything left, that it goes into the remaining TRCC pool, which we are suggesting, based on feedback and some direction the county's taken, that 100% of the operations and overhead for the Culture Parks and Rec Department be covered by the TRCC taxes, and that with whatever is left from that 50% be allocated to capital improvements for those facilities, and that the remaining 50% be earmarked for a future projects fund, so that we can make sure we're saving for our future and planning ahead for those things that will need potentially bigger support or have an opportunity that arises that we hadn't been planning on, that we have that funding available. When we look at some of our neighboring counties, they they're ahead of us a number of years on this and have fund balances of some fairly significant resources that are now being able to be utilized for some great asset development in their communities, and we don't want to fall behind in this effort. So these recommendations are based on what we're currently looking at in the Culture Parks and Rec portfolio. So as the county grows and things change, if there are additional facilities or venues that are added to the Culture Park and Rec portfolio, this may change. And we're just asking, as a Tourism Tax Advisory Board, that the Strategic Planning Committee at the county does involve us in that conversation before adding any additional facilities or venues to the Culture Parks and Rec portfolio. And I just want to finish with, because of course it's very important to me that everyone understands the importance of tourism in our community. We do talk about the number of visitors increasing, and there are definitely challenges associated with that as well, as Ron mentioned. But overarchingly, the benefits that come from our visitors, if we manage them correctly, is really impactful to our community. We had, in fiscal year 2017, $273 million in taxable sales from our visitors. That's an increase of 9% from fiscal year 16. So what we're doing is working. Those taxable sales account for 9.1% of the total local sales tax revenue to Weber County, and results in over $1,200 being remaining in the pockets of each of our Weber County households due to the impact of tourism and those taxes that our visitors are paying, so our residents don't have to. Any questions for either of us?
I have a question with regards to the goal funding. It was left off there. The goal funding was listed,
Yeah.
but a percentage was not listed. Is there a reason why a percentage wasn't listed?
It's always been a flat amount, so the recommendation was to leave it at the current funding level of $60,000 a year.
I can respect that that would be a flat amount, but is that, I know that as they may be contributing to additional of those components of the TRCC, could that be brought into question, that maybe they should be placed on a percentage as well?
Sure.
So that as they would grow, then they would have a possibility of having a growth component along with that.
I think the committee would be more than happy to explore that, because the funding had remained consistent for so many years. I think it was just more of a status quo than anything else. But yes, looking at a percentage, I think would be great.
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Ballard or Ms. Tolliver?
I do.
Please.
So Steve is a restaurateur here in the county. Are you pleased with this? Do you believe that you benefit because of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is good, an example of good government. Where it's responsible. We've had a group and a committee of people who are in the industry, who have studied this, who are good, guiding these kind of things and really talking about. So I feel very happy with it, and it's very, some of our concerns are that as we've turned this corner, that the money that starts to come in gets put to the right way. That's why we included the infrastructure component, but also we absolutely have to be committed to dollars spent for marketing and advertising. It's a hard ask sometimes. Just like you were bringing up, how can you spend this much money on these things? Well, that's kind of marketing and advertising. Is we've got to so we've got some money included in there that we got to continue.
What is the restaurant tax right now?
1%.
1%. Very good. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Last question I have, are you familiar with the percentage that's used in economic development circles or economic impact or development circles about the number of businesses that locate to our area because they came here first? They came to Weber County because they were skiing, or because they came to the marathon, or they came to an Xterra or whatever. What are the percentages of those businesses that come here first before they relocate?
That stat is available. I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but I think that the important thing to remember is if we look at the visitor economy, every relocation, whether it's residential or business, starts with a visit, right? Every person has to visit a community before they make a decision to live there, or move their business there, raise their family there, or whatever the case may be. And so everything that we're doing, when I talk about the benefits of tourism growth and our asset growth, I mean, one of the great things about what we do is what makes for a great destination also provides great quality of life elements and vice versa. So the two really go hand in hand as long as you're smart in the planning of them. And with these visitors that come in for relocation, I mean, we know anecdotally, obviously, there are a lot of folks who have chosen to make their home in the mountains because so many more people can work remotely these days. But every one of these transition points starts with a visit, and if we're not providing that level of experience once they arrive, then the future move may or may not happen.
I thank you, and it's probably a question not from the Office of Tourism, the Governor's Office of Tourism, but I know that from the Governor's Office of Economic Development, it's 87% of those businesses that relocate outside of Weber County and come and locate to Weber County have visited because of a activity regarding tourism. One last question or statement that I just want to be on the record. The amount of money each household enjoys because of tourism is what amount?
$1,223.
So every home, every business enjoys a tax credit of $1,223 because we have tourism in Weber County. I just wanted to make that point.
Annually.
Any commissioners, this is on our action items.
I'd like to make a couple comments. My preference would be that I'm not on the record, so if we can do that. Oh, we're on the record regardless if I say it or not? Okay, then I guess I'll make them on the record also. Don't punch me when I'm fun with you.
Please, for those of you who
don't laugh.
Don't laugh.
It encourages me.
He's not funny.
So we are going to have a transition into Parks and Recreation, creating more synergy, we hope. There's a tremendous amount of energy and synergy between, I think, Goal and the CVB and Parks, Recreation, and Culture for sure, but we want to create even more of that. And so it's really important that as we look at this modeling, and again, we have worked towards this modeling. I think this hopefully will make it all the way through to fruition, and all the work that you've done for the 3 years I've been here will finally, be cemented and work forward. But I want to feel comfortable that Marty and Jennifer, who are department directors, are comfortable with this. And I just want to make sure that they're on board, on the record. I feel that they're comfortable with it moving forward, so I just wanted to make sure that you guys have been working closely, which I know you have.
And I didn't specify that, but Marty, Jennifer, and I were the three on the task force that came up with the projections.
Wonderful. Second question is we've had growth every single year. We've had amazing growth every single year. 9% is just outstanding. Is there any tools that you use to show that the work that you're doing is contributing to this, and it's just not natural growth within the market? Because it's just been phenomenal. I think anecdotally we believe, because the work that is being done by this group and by Sarah. But is there any tools that we look at to say, okay, we are actually moving the dial with the work that we are doing specifically to Weber County?
So this crosses the line a little bit between the Tourism Tax Advisory Board and what they're doing and what Visit Ogden is doing. But just to address that, anytime that you put marketing out into the market, you know that there is some element of people remembering where they saw it, being exposed to a message cementing a word of mouth recommendation, all kinds of ways that people hear about things. As we're able to get more and more sophisticated with the tracking and analytics tools that are now available, we have the ways to bring those analytics back to the messaging that we're putting out in the marketing. We don't do any print other than one ad in Ski Utah's magazine. Other than that, everything is digital and social. So there are phenomenal tools out there now that can show us the path to conversion so that we can see. And when I have my budget hearing here on Friday, you'll hear about a lot of those and some of the new opportunities that exist. But this Big Brother world that we live in anymore, as scary as it is in a lot of ways, gives us a lot of data on the impact that various campaigns, various messaging, what's resonating, what's not, and what's not, and then what that actual conversion is from those specific campains.
All right, again, it's important that we've had, under Republican administration, record growth. I'm just having fun with you right now. But we always want to make sure the additive value that we're paying for is the return. And I feel very strongly from the analytics that you've shown us that is really what is occurring here. The last thing I'd just like to make a quick comment about is that your office goes above and beyond just in this specific area. The amazing job that you do with working with conference staff to bring conferences here, but then also provide an amazing experience. Mr. Gleason brought up an issue and concern we continue to have in the Upper Valley. And I talked to you about 3 years ago. You were already in the process of addressing this with the Sports Alliance and another communication committee and board that you had put together, you constantly. Would you mind just taking a second and just touching base so Mr. Gleason and others have an understanding that we are continuing to try to address this and move that modeling forward so that there is the least amount of inconvenience for the citizens up there, and then trying to find better ways to communicate?
Right. So as you mentioned, the first step in this process was we formed a Weber County Sports Alliance because at the time that committee is probably, I'm going to guess, 5 or 6 years old now. At the time, we had a number of athletic sporting related events occurring in our community, and as Kevin Burns pointed out to me one day, we had a near miss with a couple, one that had been permitted in Weber County and one that had been permitted in Ogden City that could have caused a lot of challenges for everyone. And so we decided it was a good idea to get everyone from Weber County and Ogden City and any of the other cities or participating entities involved. So the Sheriff's Department, the Ogden Police Department, permitting from both agencies, paramedics, you get the picture, goal, us. So we meet quarterly to discuss all of the events that are on the calendar and make sure that everybody is aware of where they are happening, what the impacts are. And then also as a bureau, because we're out selling, trying to get these events into our community, we propose them to this committee prior to ever submitting a bid so that we make sure we have the support of all of the permitting entities before we even go after it. During that period, we were hosting a lot of national championship level cycling races with USA Cycling and knew that those have a very large footprint, especially on the Upper Ogden Valley, but also in downtown Ogden with the criteriums, and decided, made a conscious decision to take some years off of recruiting cycling events to try to give that a break. They are, I'm not going to lie, they are huge economic impact drivers. And for us who are, our contract with you mandates that we drive a certain amount of economic impact and room nights and revenue into our community. So to know that those are out there and want to come into our community and to pass them up is sometimes painful. But we're trying to make sure that we're recognizing the needs of all facets of our community. We live here too, and we want to make sure it's a wonderful place. So in addition to that, last year we started a Ogden Valley Community Collaboration Committee, it's a mouthful, which has involved numerous entities in Ogden Valley as well as downtown. It's a lot of those same players that I talked about before, but the Ogden Valley Business Association, the Ogden Community Foundation of Ogden Valley, and I'm missing a few off the top of my head, but trying to make sure we have as robust participation in that as we can. We talked through these events and doing an event evaluation matrix. It's also been good to have the Weber County and Ogden City permitting people who work in those departments working together. We have some issue like Fort Bonaventura falls in both, so it's just been a good opportunity to make sure everybody's on the same page. We meet twice a year to make sure we're reviewing everything and doing filling out those event matrix. The challenge now is how each of the permitting bodies implements those into their permitting process. So that is something that Scott's team and here and Ashley's team at the city are working on to see how we then take that feedback from the community and implement it into further permitting practices.
So I just want to say thank you. There's an added value even on top of the dollars brought in on the services that continue to be provided by the CVB. You were saying from Kevin Burns' conversation that the process now is catching events that should not be licensed or permitted. Now we're trying to get together to have a better communication modeling with the Upper Valley.
Excuse me, we're what?
We are not trying to, we are, and we continue to grow that process. We are actually now looking at events through a matrix for the additive value that they bring. And even though there's some that would bring us a substantial economic impact, we have set them aside because of the impact in the Upper Valley. So it's not that we're not hearing the Upper Valley. I think sometimes the Upper Valley is not hearing us, that we are trying to make some changes. We have made changes. We will continue to find a better process, working on the foundations that you have built, and the great work that's being done by, the individuals that, through the Goal Foundation and through the CVB, and then through the volunteerism that we have in the Upper Valley. So we have ways to go, but we've started that process, and I just want to say thank you for all the tremendous work that you've done in bringing all this together and then providing a forum for folks like Mr. Gleason to come and talk to make the Upper Valley, what the citizens want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, Commissioners. At this point, I'd like to entertain a motion to accept the TRTT or the Tourism Tax Advisory Board, the TTAB Advisory Board's presentation.
Second.
A motion and a second to approve it. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. For this body here, and who may be watching it another time, I want to point out one key component that was talked about in this dialogue. No one likes taxes, especially property taxes. We learned today that $1,223 of taxes are waived on every person's property tax because of tourism. If we had no tourism in Weber County, everyone on their property tax would be paying $1,223 more. We also know through the Governor's Office of Economic Development that new growth happens with new businesses because they come here first. Tourism is a great investment in Weber County. And in order to grow Weber County, by not raising taxes, we have to grow our economy. By growing our economy, that then covers the added expense that more expenses to the county, like increased insurances and utilities and anything else that would help cover those costs. So this is a good planting of a seed for us for the future. It'll have benefit for the grandchildren of our grandchildren. And so I just wanted to make that point. Thank you. Commissioners, we're going to move on. Mr. Olson, you're next. Number 2 is a request for approval to ratify a contract by and between Weber County and the Utah Youth Rodeo Association for the Utah Youth Rodeo season 2018 to 2019 held at Golden Spike Event Center. Duncan Olson.
Good morning, Commissioners. This is a contract with the Utah Youth Rodeo Association. We got the contract back. It's for their 2018-2019 season. The reason it needs to be ratified was because it was sent to the fair office instead of the Golden Spike. As you know, the Weber County Fair hosts the finals of the Utah Youth Rodeo, so there was a little confusion there. But for the most part, it's just our standard contract that we've had with them for a long time. It's investing in our youth, giving them an opportunity to compete in rodeo and learn about the culture and help breed some more rodeo prospects for us down the road.
Commissioners, just a point of clarification, this Utah Youth Rodeo Association was started 24 years ago, where Utah did not have many competitors at the NFR. And now we are at the top of we have the top competitors at the National Finals Rodeo in our area. And I think some of that comes from, and some of those members that compete now competed in this a quarter decade ago, or a quarter century ago, excuse me. So I'd entertain a motion to approve this contract. We have a motion and a second. Call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Mr. Ewert, we have a presentation and discussion and or action regarding the Western Weber Futures public involvement and outreach. Charlie, go ahead.
Thank you, Commissioners. I've handed you guys before the meeting bigger maps than what you have in your packet. Your packet was pretty lengthy. I don't intend to be that lengthy here, just to give you a quick update on what we did. Commissioners, you asked us earlier this year to engage with the Western Weber public to talk about future land uses, about current land uses, about the current state of development. And part of this, if I understand it correctly, was predicated on the concern that perhaps there isn't enough education for folks who live in Western Weber County on what the existing status of land rights are in Western Weber County. So I've got a quick presentation to show you, and then let you know we had 4 different meetings. We talked to the public, we had surveys, we took comments, and we created maps. At the end of this presentation, I'll show you the maps that were created. They aren't intended to be, they're called final maps, but they're intended to be final for this process, not necessarily intended to be final for any kind of adoption. But they do kind of paint a picture of what we picked up from the public. So, okay. So one thing that we wanted to talk to the public about was visualizing what their neighborhoods could potentially look like in the future. Right now, the majority of Western Weber is zoned for 1 unit every 40,000 square feet, or about 1 unit every acre. There's a couple of zones out west that require 2 acres, but there's not a lot of land capable of being developed in those areas. So we got our current land uses here. The green area is land currently being taxed as agriculture. Purple area is land that is currently in industrial zoning, and the yellow area is land that is currently being taxed as residential. Here's your 2003 general plan future land use map. And what this map tells us is everything in yellow should be either 1 or 5 acre residential or agriculture. It doesn't say where the 5 acre should go. It doesn't say where the 1 acre should go. So we just do our best to try and figure this out. Current conditions. One thing you see on this map is all the blue dots. Those blue dots are existing structures. And if you look really closely, you could see blue dots in the unincorporated area, which is west of the shaded area. Those are existing homes out west. Not a whole lot going on. This, hard to see on the screen, these red dots represent 1 dwelling unit every acre. That's 16,000 additional red dots. If we were to develop out west at 1 unit every acre, we can add 16,000 dwelling units to the land. Some people said, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense because we've got wetlands areas, we've got streets and roads that you didn't take into account, which I actually did. I did take into account all of those things, and maybe 16,000 is more like 10,000. The point is that it's a lot. And it's a lot that we need to be thinking about in the future. This is based on existing zoning, which was allocated in 1958. And so we need to plan to grow in that manner if we're not going to change policies. If you look on the square on the left-hand side, this is traditional 1 acre development. Look at the square on the right-hand side, and this is potential for cluster development. This is one thing that we brought to you guys when we went through the cluster code revisions earlier this year, that you could potentially still get agricultural lands out of cluster development if you do it the right way. Showing to the public what 1 unit to the acre looks like on a more close-up scale. So we're at 2550 and 4300 West intersection. Everything inside of that polygon is inside of this square right here. Okay, what I did was I grayed out everything that wasn't 1 to 2 acres of land. The blue polygons are polygons that could be developed divided 1 or 2 more times. The red polygons are lots that can't be divided anymore. So if you divide those the blue polygons, you get 56 additional 1 acre lots in that area. If you take all of the existing farmland and you divide those to 1 acre lots, you can get 358 additional 1 acre lots in that area compared to what existed in the first place. So one of the issues that we have found when we're talking to the members of the public is they want to preserve their rural character. They want to preserve the farmland. They want to preserve what they think goes into the character of their community. And what doesn't seem to be very well understood is what they're experiencing now. They've got a few 1 acre lots surrounded with farmland. But all that farmland has development rights and development potential. And as soon as farmland or farming doesn't produce the economic yield that the landowner needs, oftentimes we see it go towards development. We ran through a couple of scenarios with the public. This is half a unit to the acre. This is what a community looks like. And this is the context. Here's almost 1 unit to the acre. This was 1 unit every 2 acres. The context. This is almost 1 unit to the acre, and the context. So you can see one unit to the acre can exist in very high density communities.
Yeah, go back to that. Go back to the one, if you don't mind.
This one?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead, please. You're great.
So those are $2 million homes.
Right.
Those folks aren't mowing their grass.
Right.
That's not what a 1 acre lot looks like out here.
It's true.
So I think, you're showing it, but you're showing this amazing, but a 1 acre unit in wherever.
That was in Virginia, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So, okay.
So maybe this is a little bit closer to home. Maybe. Still a lot of grass to mow. There's the context. Something I heard a number of times is 1 acre lots or even 5 acre lots too small to farm, too large to mow. There's the context. 1.8 units to the acre. So you can see we get a little bit more suburban in these contexts here. 1.9, so this is 2 units to the acre. The half acre lots, there's the context there. The point of all this and talking to the public about it was, what does your community currently look like? What could it or will it most likely look like as those agricultural lands continue to develop? What do you want it to look like was the next question that we had. So as we made the maps, we actually approached the public with just blank maps and markers. And we said, draw what you want. That was kind of a tough exercise because we were going in with a blank slate, but we did get a number of responses that were very valuable. Most of it was in text, but don't do this or don't do that. But some of it was drawn out. If you look down here at the bottom of the map, you've got, does this work? No. You've got a big area down by the Ogden Bay, which somebody wrote on the map that they want to see that as a huge park. That's like 2,000 acres of parkland. 0 people said that that was a bad idea. So we took that idea, put it on a map, we took it back out to the public, and we said, what do you think about this? And we had a whole bunch of green stickers, meaning we love it, and 0 red stickers on that. If you look at the Weber River as it comes around, intersects with the cities out west, we had a number of requests for a Weber River Parkway, or at least the extension from Ogden all the way out to the Ogden Bay. But a few people say we hate that idea, but most people said we love that idea. In fact, when it came to parks and recreation, trails on old rail beds, trails along canals out west, trails along the Weber River, and trails along every major street corridor was highly desirable. Between 65 and 85% positive support for that from all of our survey respondents. So these are the desired future land uses specifically. If you look at the green and you look at the legend up there, maybe even easier to look at this on your papers than it is on the screen. The green area is intended to be large lot agriculture. We couldn't pin down what large lot agriculture is. And those with...
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
Go ahead. Who was telling you large lot agriculture?
It was just a combination of different responses. It was the interpretation that I drew from the different responses that we received. We did have a few people say not large lot agriculture. In fact, I've got another map that's in your larger packet that shows there's a couple of spots along, is that 5300 West or whatever that 50-something hundred West street is. A couple of people said, we'd like to see quarter-acre lots out here. And these were people with, 20 to 30 acres of land.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm asking you that is, as you talk to the farmers out there, a large lot agriculture is probably a house on 15 acres so that they can run their machines, right? They can turn them around, they can get them on and off the road, they can have a barn, they can store everything. Some folks may be saying large lot agriculture where they're saying 3 acres in a house or 2 acres or 1 acre. So that, in my mind, that's nebulous, trying to figure out what, and I know this is at a 50,000 foot level right now.
It's worth the question, because when we're talking about large, I mean, how large is large? If you look at the legend, we're talking about 1 acre is large. And
when you talk to the farmers who call me up every day and yell at me,
1 acre is not big
1
enough.
acre, 3 acres isn't hardly enough for them.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't want to send their machines to 3 acres.
Right.
That's what they're telling me. I don't know anything about farming. I eat the food they make, so I listen to them. But for purposes of what we're looking at, we've got to really narrow that down because a 1 acre is not a farm.
So I tell you a little bit later in this.
It's somebody else.
No, I agree with you. I tell you a little bit later in this presentation, there's a dichotomy. The dichotomy is we want to keep our rural community character with large farm acreages, but we don't want to give up our land rights of 1 unit to the acre. And that is the same dichotomy that existed in 2003. It's documented in the 2003 general plan. And that's kind of a stalemate. What do you... No, I wish I had a silver bullet to that. In fact, this map even furthers the problem. So you look at the green area, that's 1 lot to the acre, or 1 acre lots, otherwise known as large lot agriculture. Okay. If you look at the yellow area, that's the area that is within 1,000 feet of existing sewer. And sewer seems to be a big limiter on the ability for growth. One of the questions we asked in our surveys is growth something that should happen in your community? And a lot of people said yes, but not here, not next door. So if growth should happen in your community, where? As I fleshed out some of those answers, the majority response was where the sewer system currently is, where the sewer lines are, within a certain distance of that. As that sewer system continues to expand, the answer will expand. Our original mapping showed those yellow areas. And
I'm a big fat liar. So that's not how the sewer district lays sewer. The sewer district lays trunk lines to usage.
Right.
Because they don't want to put dollars out for trunk lines unless there are impact fees and residents to use those.
Right.
So we're caught in a dichotomy there.
Yep, exactly, another dichotomy. As you look at developments that are within a certain feet of existing sewer lines, those developments might find it more financially supportable to extend a line to that trunk line, which makes those lands closer to the lands next door. So that's kind of how that expansion might happen. But you're right, there is definitely a dichotomy there. But folks who looked at these yellow areas said, well, maybe we can deal with 1/3 acre, 1/2 acre lots here. We put that on a map, we took it back out to the public at another meeting, and the public said, no, we want 1 acre lots in our area. And so if you look at the map, it says future standard or clustered residential. The map does something. It tells us areas that might be prime for a little bit more growth and areas that aren't quite prime for a little bit more growth. That is just a very generality that could potentially go into a general plan. But you're right, it doesn't come up with the silver bullet, because we're still looking at landowners who have current entitlements for 1 dwelling unit to the acre, and we're not quite sure how to parse that. Either we take entitlements away or we find some other program to ensure that the green areas stay open. Or we embrace the fact that we've already made the entitlements and we look at those green areas as yellow areas as well. Okay. That's land uses. As we look at 47th and 12th Street, we had a good conversation about this last week. 47th and 12th, future commercial. We go out west on 900 South where the West Weaver corridor might intersect. Maybe some future commercial there. And you look down south to 2550 South where it could intersect with the West Weaver corridor as well. And potential future commercial there. There was some hesitancy to future commercial, but most of these areas, with the exception of 47th and 12th, are a little bit of a distance away from where current homes are, so a little bit less resistance. As we get to the transportation map, well, let's just go there. Transportation map. You look at that big red line on the west side of the valley, west side of the county there. That is where the public wanted to see the West Weaver corridor. That is not where UDOT currently has it planned. So UDOT hasn't done their EIS, they haven't done their formal study, but they are planning to go, it's right between the
Explain the acronym EIS, please.
environmental impact statement.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Which at that point, they would need to know the actual alignment it's going to go.
So we don't have, this line does not even, we don't even have an environmental impact, let alone, so this is just hypothetical, it's just some ideas.
Yeah, one of the things that takes it a little bit more than just hypothetical is there is a state statute that requires the county to notify UDOT whenever there is a permit being processed within that right-of-way. So this is a right-of-way corridor preservation that they have designated. They've told us that anytime we get a building permit or a land use permit in this area, we got to notify them. We can't approve it within 90 days so that they have enough time to go and work with the landowner to try and acquire the land. But I did talk to UDOT, and they said they acquired zero property for
Is this along the 6400 corridor? Or
Yeah.
is this along, okay.
Yep, this is between 59 and 67 is where their preferred alignment is.
Yeah, this line then is not correct, because
Well, that's what the citizens are saying, where they citizens want it, but it's not where.
Right.
thank you.
So our original mapping had it shown where UDOT wants it to be. And if you look at the county's GeoGizmo, you turn on the transportation layers, you will be able to see where UDOT wants it to be.
Thank you for that clarification.
You're welcome. As we looked at where it intersects with 900 and goes a little bit further to the north between 59 and 67, where UDOT wants it to be, the landowner said that's going right through some of our prime agricultural property. There's nothing here for that freeway. But if you swing it further west and intersect it with our industrial zone, you might actually have something there to pick up. As I talked to UDOT about this, they said, well, it's really going to come down to cash. What's the expense to swing it that far out west versus how much traffic is that actually going to generate or accommodate? If you're...
The big one, Charlie.
Right.
I think listen, if you put it out on, 90 or 1,000 or 100 or whatever that is, I mean, you are picking up zero west growth. You put it on 64, and this is probably what they're thinking of, you can pick up from 64 to 100, and then basically all the way to I-15.
Right, and you got all of Plain City that would take it. Right now, if you swing that far west, you're probably going to see those incorporated cities heading to I-15 instead of taking West Weaver. So if you look at a latent demand model, you're going to see that most people will still skip the freeway out west and drive into town to get onto I-15 if we go that far west.
The other component now that they've just incorporated is this access to opportunity, economic, community development opportunities, and as you swing it farther west, they're not picking up those numbers, and so on the matrix, it just won't score high enough for them to build.
I appreciate that that perspective. One of the advocates of moving it that far west was maybe it can help stimulate and support growth in the industrial area, which perhaps we can bring more utilities to that area to allow that to happen. So that's kind of a big question mark. The folks really want it to move out west, but I don't know if UDOT's going to ever fund it to go that far out west, at least not the way that we're growing at this time. If you look at some of the other transportation connections, we did incorporate some of the recommendations from Hales Engineering, their report that came out in 2014 regarding allowing the grid system to just naturally fill in, just using the section lines. And so you can see most of those lines, at least on the west side of the Weber River, a little bit east side of the Weber River, a little bit on the west side, is just filling in the section line streets, which had mostly support. A little bit of people saying, "Ooh, this goes right through my property. I don't like it." And then desired future for Parks and Rec. Big, huge park down in the Ogden Bay would require the county to acquire land, or some parks district to acquire land there. Not a lot of development potential on that land. A lot of water, a lot of high salinity in the soil. But there are people who currently use it for agricultural purposes. A couple of homes out there. The other thing you see about this is if the freeway does go out west that far, it cuts right through the middle of that park, which is a challenge. The freeway would be cutting through the wetlands here and the wetlands on the north side, which poses their own financial challenges. As you look at Parks and Rec, just imagine every major street has a street side pathway. Bike lanes were a big request. And it wasn't bike lanes per se, it was shoulders. The public said, we want more shoulder on all of our roads, for whatever, for the tractors, for the horses, for the cyclists. We want multi-use pathways on the sides of those shoulders for the moms and the strollers, or the families going to the park, and maybe even a non-paved horse trail. So fit all of that in the right-of-way is the request that we kept on hearing. We did ask questions like, do you want to see pathways inside of, on these small neighborhood streets, not collector streets, just the ones that go into the neighborhoods? They said those are less important. Curb, gutter, and sidewalk is okay. We like pathways going through our neighborhoods that connect the neighborhoods on the broader perspective, but on the broader spectrum. But for the most part, let's just focus on appropriate street improvements to.
Questions for Commissioner?
Yeah, so Charlie, when you take a river, does the landowner own to the river's edge, to the, how do you determine that?
In most of these cases, the landowners own to the center of the river, if not to the other side of the river.
Okay,
and so you've got landowner rights.
So if we were to put all these trails up you've got written here, we'd have to literally go purchase that.
Yep. Purchase or negotiate. So with development potential, if somebody comes in and says, I want to do a subdivision, you may say, well, reserve a right of way.
Okay, thanks.
And we did talk a lot about that. There were landowners who said, we don't want to see any kind of government force of these pathways. And so we wanted to walk carefully. In your recommendations from staff, you'll see with landowner support after, negotiation of whatever needs to happen. Okay, this is the combination map, which I have over here off to the side if anyone's interested in looking. I've also got all these maps printed out if anyone in the audience is interested in looking at it. There's one more point I forgot to mention on the commercial development, the land use side of things. You look at 47th and 12th Street. One thing we heard repeated over and over again through this process is the west side of 4700 right there at 12th Street will never develop, and the landowners do not want to see it develop. And so,
say that again.
That's interesting.
Well, I'm going to qualify it, but the one thing we heard repeatedly is that the west side of 4700 at 12th Street will never develop, and the landowners do not want to see it develop.
Did you talk to the landowners?
I have.
They called me last week, but that's not what they told me.
So let me qualify this. I did not talk to landowners through this process. The final maps that the public saw at the last meeting show no development on the west side of 4700 because that is what we thought the landowners wanted. The landowner said that has been misrepresented. So the landowner did talk to me about a week ago and said, no. We're not developing now, but we sure would love the opportunity for a commercial village to happen here in this area. And he'd like to see, at least on the southwest side of that intersection, he'd like to see his 10 acres potentially become commercial. And he's working on submitting an application to make that so. On the north,
all four property owners.
Mm-hmm. On the northwest side, I haven't made contact yet. I've left a couple of messages, but my suspicion is that southwest side is Mr. Constessa, Dennis Constessa family, and he said no. The folks who are saying that we don't want to develop are misrepresenting what we're actually saying.
And that's my only concern. Is I have been very happy with the input, with the participation of the community, with the manner in which they've conducted themselves, the excitement of being part of their community. But I think sometimes some folks are speaking for other landowners, and somebody that's speaking for someone who owns 100 acres, you know, may want to use their piece of property in a manner different than what, you know, is being represented as. So I like what you've done here, and I like the community direction, but we've got to figure out a way to get down to the details on some of these things, because, you know, I think you're running into this, you know, I want my property, I want it zoned to 1 acre lots, unless I want to sell my 30 acres and subdivide them so I can make the maximum profit.
I've actually made a map. It is in your packet that looks like that. It's kind of hard to see on the 8.5 by 11 pages, but one of the surveys that we asked them to identify the general area that they live and then attribute what kind of a rezone would you like to see here. Would you like to see a down zone, up zone, 1 acre zoning? We had some interesting responses there. We had a very large piece of property on the northern side out west. Property owner saying, we will never develop and we never want to see development out in our area. And so we would like everything down zone to 1 unit every 20 acres. That was a couple 100 acre chunk of land. And within a quarter of a mile, we had someone who had probably 40 or 50 acres saying, please, let's talk about half-acre lots or quarter-acre lots in this area. So a lot of competing interests from the individual landowners there. It's going to take hard decisions if we do choose to go in any direction on this. It's going to take hard decisions that not everyone's going to be a winner on. So key findings as we come out of this, you've got a whole list of recommendations that I've put together just from what the public has told me, both in land use, transportation, and parks and recreation. But a few things that kind of stand out above the others is existing land rights allow approximately 16,000 dwelling units in the unincorporated area. Few members of the public were aware of that. And a number of people said, these are scare tactics. You're trying to scare us into doing something different. And it's not necessarily true. We're just trying to inform you on what could potentially happen. It may not be in our lifetime that we see 16,000, but we need a plan as if that's the case, because that could happen. The public don't completely understand the new changes to the cluster subdivision code. So many people said, no cluster, no cluster, no cluster. Most of them who were saying that were saying clusters just reserve a chunk of open space that can later be developed. They're not aware that through the cluster subdivision code, they permanently preserve with a conservation easement those lands. Some of the ones who became aware of that said, well, but then you got 20 or 30 acres surrounded by quarter-acre lots, and how is that guy going to go out at 4 o'clock in the morning and cut his crop? Because everyone's going to complain about that. So there's still the diverging and dichotomy of interest there. And that is, so right now our agricultural zone requires every subdivision to have a note to go on the plat that says this is an agricultural zone, you're going to have agricultural operations, deal with it. It's not quite that direct, but it really is the response that could be given. Large landowners desire to maintain their land rights, while small landowners desire to see less land rights spread across the farmland. So you got a dichotomy between the large and the small landowners.
So that is my one complaint about what you've presented here. As I've gone through this, I read this other night and spent a great deal of time on it. And you went through there and you listed very well the values of the large lot owners. But you said earlier that those large lot owners wanted to stay 1 acre lots. And that's not what I heard. You didn't write it down in here, but you just said it. And 2 weeks ago, I had 5 developers in my office in a week. And 3 of them were property owners out there. Mm-hmm. And each one of them told me that they wanted density.
Yeah.
And in my mind, that's what this, when you list the values of these large lot owners here, parcel owners, they say density. I've had several farmers come into me and say, look, don't you take away my rights to develop, because this is my 401k sitting out here. Right. And so when you go through here and list your staff recommendations, you say in there, do not allocate any more density rights to the western Weber County area. Well, I disagree with that. I think your findings are wrong. That's not what the farmers told me out there. Yeah. They told me, don't take my rights away from me.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've heard the same is don't take the existing rights away. A few people have said we want more rights. And so what I'm saying, documenting here, is no additional rights than what already exists. So at 1 acre, 1 unit to the acre.
That's right. You said no additional rights.
Right.
And I'm saying you're wrong. I'm saying these large property owners, in fact, want to have more density. You know, you can question whether or not development's going to come to West Weber County and what's going to happen there. But I tell you, just 2 days ago, I went over to talk to the health department on sewers over there. And if you go out to 7500 West and turn south, they showed me a subdivision out there of 13 lots today, and 100 lots behind it. That are getting ready to develop today on 1 acre lots. Well, if you're going to develop a 7500 West, I've got a daughter who lives at 7900 West, and that's happened. I didn't know the road went that far almost years ago. And my point is, if you're going to get that kind of development out there, well, the other day we sat down, and in your findings here, you said that we shouldn't have density any further than 1,000 feet away from that sewer system. Well, that's not what the sewer district tells you. They specifically put that sewer system through there to sewer that entire area.
Right.
Right. So they're planning on density through there, and when we started looking at the natural flows of what would end up happening there, for all intents, you're going to see density from the West Weber River, or from the Weber River
Eastward. Yep.
Yeah, there's just going to be growth in there. And the people who own that property in there, the ones I've talked to, they don't want us to take away their rights by saying they have to have 1 acre lots in there. The large property owners. In fact, we had somebody just the other day withdraw a subdivision from you guys because of 1 acre lots. He says the density's too high. I'm going to wait and come back some other day.
Yeah.
And he's got hundreds of acres out there that he wants to develop today. I'm telling you, I am shocked at the amount of demand there is for development in West Weber County right now.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There's a ton, not a lot, a ton.
Yeah. So to reemphasize the findings from here, we were only going off of what folks told us. And admittedly, we had probably a quarter of the people who were involved were the large landowners. We didn't have a significant amount of large landowners engaging this process. We have heard others have come to talk to commissioners that haven't come to talk to us directly. I've only received comments from 2 or 3 large landowners who talk about additional density, like I mentioned earlier in the meeting. But they haven't come to chat with us and didn't engage this. So I just wanted to be true to this process, understanding very clearly that we need a lot more public involvement and public process here.
Commissioner Ebert.
So again, the purpose of this, Charlie, wasn't to create a new general plan. The purpose of this is that we have an understanding, as Commissioner Jenkins is pointing out, that the Western Weber's changing, and there's tremendous demand with growth potential out in Western Weber, as across the entire county. We have to figure out how, from a county perspective, we zone to meet that demand with understanding what the community's needs are,
Right.
or desires are. That's why at the top of this, you are writing desired.
Right.
This doesn't mean this is what the county is going to adopt.
Right.
This potentially gives us the initial tool then to look at our transportation corridors, our natural growth areas, our most viable land for either commercial, retail, and or residential growth. Identify that, lay that over the top of this. Then the third step is the process of talking to those landowners to see what they want to do with their property. And as Commissioner Jenkins is experiencing lately, there's a huge demand, and there's a future demand. Some folks, they want to farm for another 20 years, but then they know their kids they're off at college right now, and they're not going to. And so how do we create zones that meet the desired needs and understanding of the community, the present landowner's use, the county's understanding of potential growth areas, which allows us to drive the infrastructure to those areas, and then future growth wants and needs of those landowners. So this is just the initial step in moving forward with a general plan revision that has multiple steps to be added and layered over the top of this.
Right. One of the
That
final
makes that-
recommendations, that's perfect. That's exactly, if you look at one of the final recommendations in the memo, it's time for a little bit more public education and perhaps even time to start talking about a new general plan. We definitely need more public involvement, though. I didn't feel like we had it enough.
But we've got to understand that we have to overlay where, when you look with the developers and the landowners, where the most natural areas that will grow. It doesn't make us any, okay, I'm just being me. It makes zero sense to put the Western Weaver Corridor extension out on 7,500 to 1,000. It makes no sense.
Right.
Because it will never pay for itself. It will never get the traffic. It won't provide the onus for residential growth along that corridor. It just doesn't make any sense.
It likely won't get built.
And if we zone with 1 acre lots throughout the entire county, that doesn't make any sense. Okay, if we put commercial nodes in areas where there's no infrastructure and there'll be no growth, it makes no sense. And so we've got to have sensible decision. I mean, everybody screams about government, we don't use common sense. Well, if we just use this, we wouldn't be using any common sense, because we know some of this will work, but some of this won't.
Right.
Some of the demand's already out there, as Commissioner Jenkins is saying. So we've got to make difficult decisions. We've got to inform the community, and then we've got to have them help us to make those decisions, understanding that we've got to put zones in areas that will have that natural growth occur. And there's a
Exactly.
want and a need.
Exactly. And that's the ultimate finding from all of this, is that there hasn't been enough public education to help them understand exactly what it is that's coming, the wave that's coming. When we did the Ogden Valley General Plan, our projections showed Western Weaver developing before Ogden Valley does. You're going to see a lot of development out here before you see a push for more development in the Ogden Valley. And that kind of thing, it just isn't very well understood by the folks who live out there.
Charlie, I'm going to finalize. I know Commissioner Jenkins doesn't have any more comments for you right now on this. You
The only thing I'll say, and I'll be 2 seconds, is
said you were done.
we've got to get this figured out, because one of the issues a lot of folks have, and we have a development right now, is there's no infrastructure driven and being allotted in Western Weaver to provide the appropriate corridors. And if we don't know where to put those corridors because we haven't planned them, then we'll never get this figured out and we'll have a mess.
Any
Charlie-
other questions for me?
Yes, this is the last one. In fact, it's more of an assignment.
Ready for it.
Thank you. Thank you. With you, Rick here, and I know Sean will hear this too, but I'd like you, you talked about more public involvement, more sending this message, letting the people know, us being more transparent. I'd like you to get with our DCHO group and even establish a Facebook or a talking type page, a public media, a place where people can go in and type in their, or ask questions, be available. So if they come up with an idea at 10 o'clock at night that they hadn't thought of, they don't sleep on it, forget about it the next morning. Build a page where you can have involvement and show all of this information that this is a collection of a lot of people's comments right now. A lot of people have invested a lot of comments to get you to this point. So let's perpetuate their comments. Let's not let them die somewhere. Let's keep it going, and it won't cost us any more money. And then let the public kind of see where they take this whole thing.
Fantastic.
And, yeah, that'd be great. Then you're going to get the involvement off those comments that you're looking for.
Happy to do so.
Okay, great. This is a discussion or action regarding futures public involvement or outreach.
It was intended to be discussion only.
And that's, I'm good with that. Commissioners, are you good with that? Great. Then we're going to move on. Charlie, number
Thank you.
4 on our agenda. Number 4 is by Jared Anderson. A request for approval of a contract between, can we get the lights up, please? contract by and between Weber County and the Caldwell Richard Sorensen for 12th Street Utility Construction, Segment 3.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Mr. Anderson?
This is a contract, as it says, for the utility reconstruction. As you're aware, we got BHI, I think it was a couple commission meetings ago, got them on board. They're doing the stormwater and culinary water for this project. We went through the procurement process, put this out to bid for the construction management work, went through that whole process and did the gradings and ratings, and CRS came out on top. Do you have any questions?
Commissioners, any questions for Mr. Anderson regarding item number 4 on our agenda? None being heard, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the contract items from Weber County and Caldwell Richard Sorensen.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. That motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you.
Item number H on our agenda is a public meeting. Now we will request a motion. I will request a motion to adjourn this public meeting and convene a public hearing. Fatima? I've got a motion. So moved. Seconded. Fatima? It's not a roll call, sorry. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Get confused on those still. Thank you. Thank you. Felix Yavarino, it's a public hearing to consider, take action on a request to vacate public utility easements located on the sides near lots 1 through 6 and on the sides of lots 7 through 12 with Henry Flats Cluster Subdivision. Felix Yavarino.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'll just kind of...
Good morning.
Yes, so this is a cluster subdivision in Western Weber, and it's located 400 South, 4350 West in Taylor. And the project area is 11.89 acres. And so an option that we have in the planning office is for if there's an easement that exists on private property, then we actually have an application for that owner to come in and petition for this easement to be vacated. And that's what has been done in this situation, where there were some easements created with the dedication plat for public utility and storm drain. And the developer has come in and requested some of those easements to be vacated, and due to they're no longer being, those easements no longer being needed, he's actually obtained approval letters from Questar Gas, Rocky Mountain Power, and CenturyLink. The utilities that are already in place are run through the public right of, or the street right of way, and so his reasoning for this vacation would be that the easements are no longer needed. All the easements are all the utilities are already in place, and so the applicant has obtained signatures from property owners that have purchased lots within the subdivision, and he is requesting to vacate the public utility easements on the sides and rear of lots 1 through 6. And if you turn to page 5 of the report, you can see areas in blue are what is being requested to be vacated. And also on the sides of lot 7 through 12 within this cluster subdivision. So it is staff recommendations to approve the request is to vacate, and based on the findings found in the report. If there are any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer those. Also, the developer, Mr. Hancock, is here with us today.
Very good. Commissioners, are there any questions for Mr. Yavarino or for the developer?
Do we have a staff recommendation?
Thank you. Staff recommendation, Mr. Yavarino.
Yes, staff recommends approval. After each reviewing agency through the county engineering, surveying, they've also reviewed the description of the areas being vacated and have approved these. and planning staff also recommends approval based on the findings in the report.
Very good. Are there any, again, I'll call one last time for questions for Mr. Yavarino. None being heard, then I'll I'll entertain a motion to adjourn our public hearing and reconvene a public meeting. Have a motion? I'll second that motion. I'll call for the vote. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. Now, item number 5 is we'll take action on the public hearing. Excuse me, I'm in error.
Yeah.
I'm in error. Thank you, Ricky. That's right. Thank you very much. I'm ask that we go back into a public, sorry, just so we can do this correctly. I'd like to may have a motion to adjourn our public meeting and again reconvene a public hearing.
So moved.
And second, we have a motion. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. Now is the time for a public, for not only for a public hearing, but for that whole thing, public comments. Are there any comments relating to this subdivision or this motion? Very good. Please state your name and your address, please.
Hi, Commissioners. I'm Susan Hancock, one of the 2 Susan Hancocks. Just retired as a math teacher, so I'd really like to see that $1,200 taken off my property taxes, but that's probably not going to happen. Just kidding. I'm a West Weber resident. I've been there for 42 years. I'm directly across from the piece of property that they're talking about. I should have probably attended some meetings that talked about cluster housing because I don't understand it. But we in Weber County have to have a huge septic system on our yards. And so I never quite understood how they were going to be able to fit a huge septic system on a half of an acre, even less than a half of an acre. So now they'd like to change the easement rules, which I believe the developers and everyone probably already knew the rules. And I just say then let them have less homes and make the properties bigger, somehow make that work, because to be able to place a septic system on that and the homes that they want to build, which are larger than I think what they initially thought. So I just like the easements to stay in place or to have fewer homes allowed on that piece of property. Thank you.
Thank you. Very good. Any other comments concerning this? None being heard? Commissioners?
So I'd like to ask a question. To the request we just heard, so the easements for right-of-ways through this, and your understanding is they won't be needed anymore, the right-of-ways for any future easement for any future utilities, because utility easement, right?
The public utility easements themselves that are actually on the lots,
right?
Those are the ones that will be part of those will be vacated.
Right.
Now, some of those will be remaining, as you can see on page 5 of the report. It shows that easements along the front. So if we look at lots, let's just look at lots 1 through 6. And so you have easements that are along the side of lot 1, and then of lots 1 through 6, you have easements all along the front of that. And so what that actually does is it provides area for utilities to run their lines. And then if you look at lots 7 through 12, you have public utility easements along the front and rear of those. And just a quick note, also this is in the service area for Western Weber, Central Weber Sewer Improvement District. So each of these lots has the sewer services in place through the right of way.
Question for you: if these easements were or were not to be vacated, how does that affect the potentiality of a drain field or for a septic?
Yeah, and so when a developer comes in and designs a subdivision, it's required that the water that falls within that subdivision boundary, it's required to be managed through storm drains and through detention or retention basins. And that's what parcel B, the open space parcel B, is designated as is retention, and they actually what they do is actually use that water that's being detained, and they use that for irrigation within the subdivision. So they're actually going to have a double use out of this water. So they're, I think it's a good thing.
So on the net, does this increase or change or decrease the amount of homes? Does it change anything?
It would not change anything. The reason that he's looking to vacate these is at a future time, he'd be looking at amending the dedication plat to basically allow for them to develop these properties in a manner that is consistent with the cluster code. Because if you look at the dedication plat, you can see that for some reason or another, they have placed buildable areas. And so those buildable areas alone are restrictive. I mean, not by much, but say you take the cluster setbacks, 20 on the front and rear, and 8 feet on the sides. And that's kind of an incentive that we offer for developers to utilize their land a little better. But in this instance, if you look at the dedication plat, there was a buildable area placed within each lot. And so that alone is restrictive. So I think this is probably kind of a preliminary step in coming and amending the dedication plat to utilize this property to what it was designed for as a cluster as lots within a cluster subdivision.
We don't have any more questions. Right now we're in the public comments portion of this, and we are in a public hearing. Are there any more questions concerning our public hearing before we go back to a public meeting?
The part we're vacating are the parts in blue.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's just side sets for the most part.
For the most part, yes.
What's the purpose of the vacation? What's the need?
Again, to allow for a little bit of more of a relaxed side and a front setback for structures to be placed on these lots.
So, okay. In as much as we're in a public hearing now, I'm going to make the appropriate action and request a motion to adjourn the public hearing and reconvene a public meeting. I didn't see any other comments, thanks. Were there any other comments in a public hearing? Go ahead. Before I'll accept a motion and let's go back. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Thank you.
My name is Phil Hancock, 3752 West, 900 South in West Weber. I wasn't involved in the original planning of this subdivision, got involved subsequently. There's a conflict between what the cluster subdivision ordinance allows as far as setback requirements for buildings and the easements that were originally drawn on the subdivision. Normally when the engineers draw a subdivision, they assume that there'll be easements needed for public utilities, and so they put them all the way around the lots. In this case, apparently, it wasn't considered that there's no need for public easements in those areas. And by putting them in there, it further restricts the landowner from using his property to the full extent intended by the cluster subdivision ordinance. And so it's a confiscation of his property in essence. If the setback says you can build a building in the rear property yard within a foot of the property line, but the easement goes out 10 foot, 9 feet have just been taken away from him. And so it's an unfair application in this case. There is no public reason or need to keep easements if they're not going to be used. Why take away from the public a right that they paid for and that they should be able to use at their discretion? And intended, again, to repeat, by the ordinance. Cluster subdivision ordinance allows them to use that property.
Very good. Thank you. Wait, before you go.
Developer, sir?
Go.
Are you the landowner or developer?
Well, I've become involved, and right now, yes, I would have to assume that I am the developer.
How are you going to
And the
address-
owner developer, yes.
How are you going to address the issue of sewage? Through a septic system, through septic plant, through?
The health department went through their approval process and has approved that, those systems already.
Yeah, but is that going to be like a large plant for the entire project, or is
No,
it
this
on-site?
this
for
was
home?
approved for individual waste
Individual
disposal
waste, okay.
systems by the health department, yes.
Thank you, that was my question.
So that, okay, that answers the other question I had for you, Felix, that I didn't get an answer to, but that helps me. Any questions for Mr. Hancock?
I don't have any questions, but do have a statement. So what ends up happening here,
Thank you, Mr.
to his
Hancock.
point, is when you have a homeowner here and you want to build a garage back there in the back, well, you can build within a foot of your property line behind your house.
Unless there's-
Yeah, unless there's an easement. And in this case, it's an easement, but it's one they're not going to use. So it literally, so it's not going to create more houses, it's not going to create more density, nothing is going to change there. They just want the use of the property, and, so this makes perfect sense to me.
Okay. Any other public comments? None being heard. Now I'll request a motion to adjourn the public hearing and reconvene a public meeting. Have a motion?
Second.
And a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We're now in our public hearing, and discussion or action to request to vacate a public utility easement located on the sides of lots 1 through 6 and 7 through 12 in the Henry Flats Cluster subdivision. Commissioners, any discussion relating to this before I'll call for a motion? No comments being heard, then I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we take action to approve the request to vacate public utility easements located on the side and rear of lots 1 through 6 and the sides of lots 7 through 12 within Henry Flats Cluster subdivision as presented by Felix.
Ordinance 16.
Second.
I have a motion for ordinance number 16 and a second. Are there any other discussion? All in favor?
Commissioner
No,
Ebert,
excuse me.
Commissioner Jenkins,
Aye.
and Chair Harvey.
Aye, thank you, Fatima. Great. Item number I is our commissioner comments. Are there any commissioner comments? None being heard, I'll entertain a motion. Excuse me. I entertain a motion to go into a closed meeting to discuss pending or imminent litigation. That's a roll call vote.
Commissioner Ebert,
Okay?
Aye. I have a motion and a second.
Okay. Second.
A second.
I have a motion and a second.
Thank you. Thank you.
now Commissioner Ebert,
Aye.
Commissioner Jenkins,
Aye.
and Chair Harvey.
Aye.
Will they come back? And they,
You okay, Fatima? Just adjourned from our closed meeting where no action was taken. I'll entertain a motion.
I'll ma-
Item K.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
So moved. Second.